Hello and welcome to another episode of A Tonic for Lunacy. My name is Donna. I was recently interviewed by a client and friend, Alicia. And Alicia is a dancer. She is a breathwork practitioner. Mostly, she is a super creative human. And she has a podcast called The Creative Process. So she brought me on to talk about creativity, my creative process, human design, and shadow. It was so much fun, and I thought it was so good and so powerful. And there were such good, like, gems in there that I asked her if I could share it with you guys on this podcast. So, what you're about to listen to is my interview with Alicia on her podcast. It's actually not even live yet, depending on when you're listening to this. So I hope you enjoy it.
I'm really excited to share with my audience the wealth of knowledge that you have, but also how you have directed a lot of your research recently, especially towards creativity. And I know creativity is really important to you. I know it's just a part of who you are, and I love that about you. And I've loved that about you before I met you. Like when when I first purchased my very first report and I opened it and I saw the care that was taken in and this is a human design shadow report. Just the care that was taken in all of the not just the word details, but the details of the pages and the um what is that? The collaging that was
Mhm.
yeah, that was sort of like beautifully random and yet totally
Makes
cohesive.
sense. Mhm.
Yes, it was so awesome. I loved it so much, and I went, there's something about this person that I really like and that I want to know more about." So, you exude creativity.
Thank you.
Just wanted
Thank you.
to Yes.
My inner child would agree with you, but I think, 30-year-old Donna would disagree with you. She would be so very confused how I am creative. So
Yeah.
thank you for validating that.
Well, and that's something that you do, right? Is you
Yeah.
you look at the person who has left behind their creativity and you support them and looking at their shadows and looking at what's keeping them from whatever it is, from being their full self. But,
Yeah.
in this case, we're looking at creativity.
Yeah.
And what
Yeah.
is that word? Like, tell me, like, tell me about that word and what it means to you.
I think we are all creative in different ways. I think we are creative in the way that we be. What the word
Mhm.
means for me is, like we have so many ideas of what these words mean. Like we have so many conditioned responses and stories and ideas of like what creativity is. So for a lot of people, it's like, oh, this person wears a lot of bright colors or wears something that's different or they are different. They're kind of weird. I think we have so many different ideas of what creativity looks like, but at the at the kind of like the bottom of the funnel, like if we look foundationally, creativity is just being who you are, no matter who that is.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of us don't allow ourselves to just be who we are, as generators. Both of us are generators essentially. It's being creative in response. It's allowing the world to show up for us and then responding from our creative perspective. And that's the piece with creativity that I had a hard time accepting, because I thought creativity had to be this big, gorgeous, beautiful, artistic thing. And in reality, it's my perspective. It's the way that I see things, the way that I process things, the way that I understand things, the way that I help other people see things a little bit differently. And that's what creativity really is. It's a new way of seeing the world. It's a new way of seeing ourselves. It's a these different connections that we make that can help somebody else understand things in a different way.
Yeah, I love that because I know so many of the people who listen to this podcast they consider themselves creative, but at the same time, it's like that pressure, this idea of
Mhm.
being creative, especially when it comes to like making something, anything, right? Art or a business plan or whatever that you're going to be creative. There's so much pressure on what
Yeah.
that looks like. And what you're saying is that, like, unless you're doing it fully the way that you want to do it and being fully you, then you're not being creative necessarily. You're stealing from other people's ideas of
Right.
what creativity is, but like when you're putting forth yourself and your perspective, then you're being creative. You can't help but be creative.
Yeah, and that's the key word, right? Like you can't help but be creative when you're just being yourself. And I think most of us, I say that I think everyone is creative in different ways because I think we have all experienced some sort of trauma in our life that has forced us to get creative in the way that we survive, that has forced us to adapt to society, to life in different ways. And that is part of our creativity. That is part of who we are. I know a lot of times it's seen as negative, and something we talk about a lot is the shadow, and the shadow can have so many different textures. It can have that quote unquote negative connotation, that negative texture, but it can also, that's just energy. And that's
Mm.
just energy that you can take and you can put it towards something else that is more beneficial, that is creative in survival, right?
Yeah,
And just being who you are.
I love that. I want you to go back a little bit now and tell us about, like, so I know you as human design shadow. Like, you teach people how to look at their human design, how to find the places where they're living in the shadow of their design versus being their full self. So, can you tell us a little bit about human design? I don't know if people listening know that much about human design.
Yeah, so human design is kind of like astrology. So a lot of people are familiar with astrology. So it is astrology times 1,000. It basically spits out this chart of of who you are, of your energy in different variations, in different formulas, in different ways. There's many ways to read the chart, although most people just read it as it is, like this is your potential. And while that's great, we all want to know what we're capable of. We all want to be validated that we are capable of something big. What I found the chart to show me was where I was not living to my potential. And in fact, where I was embodying all of these identities and all of these masks and all of these trauma responses that were keeping me in survival mode rather than making that leap to my potential, right? I was stuck in these like shadow aspects that were not allowing me to live the big life that I wanted to live. So I started to use human design in a way to help me. So just to kind of give you a background on my story for whoever doesn't know, I was born in a country that is always at war, experienced a lot of trauma around war, around family. We moved to America when I was 8. And you can imagine I didn't know a word of English, that it was kind of hard to fit in. I also had no memory of my childhood. So at around 30, when I call it like the time that I came online, that I realized what was happening, I had no memory of the last 30 years. So for me to go into therapy, I was like, this is cool. This is great. Like my life is fucked up. There's some certain things happening that probably shouldn't be happening. How do I fix this? And everything in therapy was, well, let's go back to your childhood and let's think about this. And I couldn't remember any of it. So there, I had already known human design. So I basically turned to human design in desperation of how do I heal these things? Like something feels so wrong, so empty. I cannot figure it out. I cannot get to the place where I want to get to and feel like I am healing. So I started to use my knowledge of psychology and shadow work and Carl Jung and neuroscience, and I combined it with human design to help me pinpoint where I was playing in my not self energy, in my shadow energy, without knowing why, right? Because I didn't have that memory of my childhood. So I kind of figured out how to map it so that I could backtrack and ask myself the correct questions to get to the bottom of why things were happening the way they were. And that eventually helped me figure myself out and understand who I was, not only at the shadow level, but also at the higher potential. And then I started doing shadow readings, and people really liked them because it was very validating for your trauma. Like most of us that have been traumatized, a lot of us have never been validated by anyone. And that is a different kind of pain that I think there is nothing worse than not being validated for your trauma. And, a lot of talk in the self help industry is like, well, you validate yourself. You love yourself. How can anyone else do this for you unless you do it for yourself? And that's not always entirely true because we don't allow ourselves to accept these things because we've been invalidated about them for so long. So that was really a huge part of my healing. And human design did that. It validated everything.
Yeah.
So
That's so awesome. And I love how you've taken that what you discovered about it for yourself and shared it and continue to share it with the world and continue to dig into different aspects of it.
yeah,
It isn't like, okay, I figured this out. This is
right.
it. It's like, okay, so what about this? What about this other
Yeah,
thing? Or why am I not wanting to do this? Or why do I love, I've heard you say this. I don't know where it was. Maybe it was in another interview, but like I think somebody asked you, what is your favorite channel, right? There's something in human design. There are channels that belong to us that we have that are defined for us. And you said your favorite channel was your 1/8, was your channel of creativity. And then you said when I use it, or like when I honor it or something like that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And so I don't know if this is true or not, but I love that it did something for me when you decided to focus in on creativity. It helped me connect a dot because I am also, for those of you who don't know, I'm a manifesting generator, and there's something about manifesting generators that we go after things, we pursue things, we find a passion for things, and we don't always know why.
yeah,
And that has been sometimes crippling for me because I'll want to pursue something, and I'll want to pursue dance, and I'll want to pursue writing. And on the outside they seem kind of related, but like in other worlds they don't. So I was always trying to connect. Why is my dance and my writing? And then why dance and breath work? And then why dance, breath work, and human design? Like, what am I doing? Why am I playing in this sandbox of all these different with all these different toys? And this, like creativity, of course, is such a part of who we are. So just being able to look at like strictly that aspect of human design,
yeah,
um, it's just so interesting. It's a rabbit hole and I love it. Can you talk more about so
yeah.
specifically creativity and why you decided to focus in on creativity at this time, or has that been a constant for you, or is that kind of a specific focus right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely been a constant trying to figure out my creativity, right? Like,
Mhm.
I have a lot of creative gates, I have a lot of creative channels. I'm highly individual, which means in human design that most of my channels and gates are in what's called individual circuitry. Individual circuitry is known as the freak because it is not a predictable process, it is a pulse of when it's on, and and you're doing and you're creating and everything just makes sense. And when it's off, it's melancholic, it's sadness, it's depression. It can have a lot of different labels, but it can be really hard for someone with a traumatized brain, if you will, um, who has learned to be logical in this society, and that creativity means output. Creativity means create something that you can sell,
Mm-hmm.
and make it stand out so that you can sell more. So for the creative process, having that kind of outcome that you are moving towards, it can stunt the creative process. So I have gate one in my son, which is very much like 70% of who I am is our conscious son, if you follow human design terminology. The conscious, I mean, gate one is a lot about alone time, and it's patience. And like your individual energy, Alicia, is very, you don't know, you just move. So when you talked
Mm-hmm.
about writing and dance and breath work, we don't know,
Mm-hmm.
we just move. And at some point it might all come together, and it might all make sense, and it might turn into something, and it might not. And that's the thing about the creative pulse, about that individual pulse, is that we never know. And what creates the melancholy and the depression is that we have these minds that want to know, and they want to make sense of it, and they want it to be a thing. They want it to be a mutative thing that changes the world, right? And it isn't always like that. Sometimes it's simply who you are, and you have to move in this way to be true to who you are. And that is really hard. And even as I'm saying, I'm like, shit, that is a hard concept to accept into your life, that like, I don't know why I do what I do. I just do it because it's me. And I had this conversation with a client today. The collective, the world as we know it, people that are not highly individual, they have or are not creative in this way, they have a hard time with the individual process being so unpredictable. They want to know why, they want to know how, they want to know what's next, they want to know how it's going to save the world, they want to know, what are you doing, what are you even doing?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's simply not how we move. So part of the shadow work that I've been leaning into right now is the creative process, and allowing it to be what it is, rather than how we have been conditioned to play out our creativity, because it just doesn't work. And when you allow yourself to move the way that you are meant to move, the way that is correct for you, that's when the magic truly happens. But it might not look like the magic you think it's going to look like.
Yes.
You just have to trust
Yeah.
the process.
Yes. And the process, I love that you said that. The process being always different. Like, I feel like
Yeah.
sometimes when the title of the podcast is Inside the Creative Process. And the reason why it's inside the creative process is because when I say the creative process, I'm not saying it's this thing that we all know, right? You're right. Yeah. You all know this. No, I'm saying I want to get inside of your head, of this other person's, of this writer's head, of this painter. I want to get inside of all of these different creative processes because they're all unique. They're all so interesting. They're all very different, and yet there's similarities, right? You can point to the
Yeah.
similarities, and then there's something that you can attach to say like, oh yeah, like I know that feeling. I know
Yeah.
that feeling as a creator. I know that feeling of melancholy. I know that feeling, that dip where everything that I've made is just awful. It's just
Doesn't make
horrible.
sense. None
It
of it.
doesn't make sense.
Burn
It's
it.
terrible. Burn it, throw it away, forget all of it. I'm just going to go
Yeah.
back to this. And I used to make dances when I very first moved to San Diego to dance and to make dances. When I was very first making dances, I just rented a space every Monday, invited my friends who were also dancers, and we didn't have a final destination. Like, we didn't have a performance we knew we were going to do because that was always too much pressure for me. I just wanted to play. And I was telling this to somebody last night, like I just wanted to play. I just wanted to experiment, and it made more sense to me to spend my money that way on a space than to spend that money doing anything else. Because
Yeah.
that was my passion. That was my fun. That was Monday nights for years. we just made stuff. And eventually their stuff would actually get made, which was always exciting. And then it could be presented, or ideas would be made. And I think that was also
Yeah,
equally fun.
for sure. Yeah, I mean, the idea generation process is a whole other thing, that's part of the creative process, and it's huge, right? So we all come up with ideas and have an opportunity to respond to other people's ideas or invitations, whatever, in so many different ways. Like I can, like my personal creative process is I love to read. Like I love to read new thoughts and new ideas, and then I respond to that based on my already existing knowledge of human design, my already existing knowledge of psychology, my already existing knowledge of my problems, right? Of like my issues, my clients' issues, trauma. Just we respond based on what we already know. And I think I may have digressed here, but a common misconception about creativity is that you create something out of nothing.
Mhm.
And it doesn't work that way. Creativity is, creative solutions and putting things together like I did with human design and with shadow work. That comes from my already existing knowledge base of the things that I'm interested in, the things that excite me. And why am I interested in those things? Because of my own trauma, right? So
Yeah.
it's like this circle of I had to adapt, I had to be creative because of my trauma, but also it has made me the person that I am today. And from that I can create all of these new solutions and all of these new ideas and all of these different things to help other people that are in the process as well. So it's like what you said about dance, like it just satiates me, it's just fun, I don't need to put a label on it, it just is what it is. And hindsight's 2020, right? Hindsight's like, but we had these amazing ideas, but it brought me to life. But like it had all of these incredible benefits that you don't think of when you're in it necessarily.
Yeah.
You just look at
Yeah.
how it enhanced your life.
Yeah. Yeah. And two things that really stood out for me with what you were just saying was, first of all, like when you said that it's not about making something out of nothing.
Mhm.
And I think so many, like now kind of veering it over for me specifically to dance, or to like
Yeah.
to art specifically. I think so many times we make something and then we think we need to make something completely different or new. But what the great artists do is they evolve. Like you see their evolution. It's so gorgeous to walk into an art gallery and see the evolution of an artist that is clearly their penmanship, clearly
Yeah.
their unique uh interest or unique style. And it's valuable. It's extremely valuable. And same with dance. There's a woman, I don't know if you'd know Pina Bausch, but Pina Bausch is a famous dance artist internationally, who passed away like 10 years ago. But her work, sometimes I'd look at it and be like, that's kind of exactly the same as that other thing. And that's kind of exactly the same as this other thing. But what was happening is these movements were similar, right? She would do similar movements and she had a very distinct style. But then she was so wise and her context was always very different. So that you'd get this, like the movement it did matter, but it didn't matter at the same
Yeah.
time. Like
Yeah.
there were parts of it that were, I don't know, like so moving. Like there are some like iconic images that I don't think she ever recreated after those particular images, but just seeing somebody dive back in to what they know, right? Diving back into what they know and just continue to let it evolve and let it take on the context of what is happening now for them.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a really good point. I think a lot of people create something, they're like, oh, I'm done, this is over, this is complete, and now I have to create something completely different. And even with business, we see this like, oh, I created this offer, now I'm done, and I have to create something completely different. And what sets certain people apart, and maybe this is part of the creative process too, is we're never fucking satisfied. We're hard to satiate. But it's the process of tweaking, right? It's the process of, okay, well, yeah, I created this. How can I go deeper into this movement? How can I go deeper into this color? How can I tweak this shade? How can I, change this texture just a little bit just to see what happens? Just because I'm still so in love with this and am never satisfied. Yes.
Yes, yes. And also that without the need to hold it back until it's done, right? Because it's
Sure.
never going to be
Yes.
done.
Yes, correct. And also that feedback that we receive from other people, I think creatives are do tend to be sensitive, and sometimes are
Mm.
afraid to put their work out there because of how, our own wounds, rejection, abandonment, belonging. How is this going to affect the way people perceive me? But there is something incredible that happens when you do share your work. It's the courage, it's the bravery that builds on top of each other, on top of itself, and then it shows in your work too, because then you create from that energy too. And then it's also helpful. Sometimes we get great inspiration from other people and their
Oh,
feedback.
yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I feel like that's, as an improviser, that's just like, that's immediate, right?
Yeah.
You're
Oh
like the
yeah.
feedback of the audience, or like if I don't put the work out there, it won't evolve. It can't, because maybe it's because I'm a
Yes.
generator.
No, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think even if we look at human design, like there's so many people out there that are teaching human design the way that it's the Ra, the original teacher, brought it through. But the less that we put it out there to, everybody, and here, use your insights, use your creativity, like that's how things evolve. But if we're stuck in our ways, if we're stuck in, this is the only way that I can do it, this is the only way it can be done, and I'm not even going to show anyone, how can we ever evolve?
Yeah,
How can we ever create something different?
yeah, I'm completely with you on that. I feel like if we're all if we're all part of this system, if this is part of us, then of
Mm-hmm.
course we have information to share about it. Of course we have our own understanding of it,
Yeah.
right?
And it's not, it doesn't even have to be something big. It's like the tiniest little insights. Like I like to share my stories, conversations that we have in Voxer. Not, of course, there's so much background that I could give, and there's so much more we could talk about. But sometimes it just takes one person saying something just a little bit different, and it strikes something in someone, right? And that's part of the creativity too. Is the way that we see things, the way that we talk, the way that we move, even if it's very small, very different. You don't even realize that you're doing it. To
Mhm.
you, it's normal, it's natural. But when we share, we realize, oh wow, I do have an impact.
Yeah. Yeah, so true. And the other thing that is standing out to me right now is what I've I've long like felt, but this desire for creatives to recognize the creativity in, or for people in all industries to recognize their creativity, and to like, business owners, entrepreneurs, scientists.
Mhm.
Like, there is so much shared creative process that this integration between these different industries feels really important to me. It has felt really important to me.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I think anytime you take a risk, you're a creative.
Yeah.
um, I was listening to a TED talk somewhere, something about creatives, and he was saying, all entrepreneurs are creatives. As soon as the entrepreneur gets to a point where they become the manager, like the overseer, they cease to be creative, which
Mhm.
I don't know if I necessarily agree with, but I think there is a point where we forget that our creativity can be used in so many different aspects, because we are tied to this framework, right? Like we have this structure of what this thing needs to look like, and we don't allow ourselves to paint outside the lines. And I think that's often true with business, at least what I'm seeing with the online business world, is that this is how this person did it and we must all follow. And a lot of people are failing, and a lot of people are confused, and a lot of people are frustrated because they keep following this one way of doing things, thinking it's the gold standard. But in reality, we're all meant to do things just a little bit different, just a little bit different.
Yeah. Yeah.
Take a
It's
risk.
that's reminding me of my dad. I told my father's story on a previous podcast, but he's an engineer and he watched one of my performances. Of course he did, but he watched one of my performances that was highly improvised, but had like these moments of coming together. And he asked me the question afterwards. We had to talk back, and he asked me the question, like, why improvisation? Out of total curiosity.
Mhm.
And I just said, it's so that so that we can respond to this exact moment, so that we can be right here and respond to what's happening right now, so that we're not contained in something that happened a week ago or a month ago. And he as an
Wow.
engineer was like, I do what you do. Like he whispered in my ear later and said, I do what you do. And he
Oh.
explained it to me, like how important it is to him as a manager of of processes. So he oversaw processes of building things. And he, the whole goal of a lot of people is to find a process and then stay inside of that process. That does not always work. That process that worked a month ago does not it does not take into account what is happening right now.
Right. Yeah, that's adaptability.
Yes. Yeah. And so he loved that. He just and it made me recognize, like, okay, like this is
Maybe we're not so
universal.
different. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Maybe we're not so different after all.
Yeah. It is universal. But it is a way, it's a way of thinking. And,
Yeah.
I think sometimes you either have it or you don't.
Mm.
I think most people are creative in many ways, but to live a creative life is hard. To live a creative life, I think, is to accept some form of isolation, some form of not belonging, or I'm sorry, I'll say not fitting in, because belonging is what we do when we're authentic. Fitting in is something we do when we have to be like everybody else. So I think that the creative life is amazing. It's magical. It blows my mind every single day, but it's a lot. Like it's a lot of butting heads with yourself and with society. And it's like it's no wonder that like we talk about artists being, starving, depressed, lonely people that live with their 15 cats. Because it is somewhat isolating, which is why I love that this work and like create the talk about creativity is becoming so much more mainstream, because then we find our people, we find our groups, we find the people where we belong, where we can share our creative process together.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why I love this podcast, because even though I can't see the audience,
Yeah.
like I know they're there. I
I know they're
know the kinds of people that they are. I know that they are listening and understanding. And I mean, we've talked this is my channel of individuality, is that 4323, which can be misunderstood if I'm speaking to the wrong people, which it has been.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. I mean, it's your channel is the 4323 is a lot about seeing things just very differently, and I think the way that you see dance, the way that you perceive it, the way that you connect all of the dots, with dance and life and being is different than most people. And it definitely takes a different kind of person to be able to understand that, or be able to be open to that way of perceiving things. And
Yeah.
that's one thing that human design really gives us. Like, if I'm walking through the world as this creative person and I'm trying to project my creative perspectives onto everyone, I'm going to get shot down. Like, people are going to be like, you are insane, which has happened many times. But what human design gives us is being around the correct people. If you have a line two, if you're a 2-4, like being around the correct people is really important. If you're a projector and you're accepting invitations from Joe, Bob, Mary, and Sally, and none of them are your people, then you're going to keep going down incorrect paths. So I think human design has a really great way of kind of like bringing it all back in and being like, okay, wait a second. Yes, wait for the invitation, but are you around the correct people? If you have an undefined G center, you're highly adaptable, but you're also highly influenced. Are you around the correct people? The people who you want to be?
Yeah.
Do you want to be like these people?
Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting. And I love how the different aspects come together to help point out exactly what's going on, right? Like you're around the
Yeah,
wrong people, you think you're around the right people, you're adapting to them and you're able to be like them, but somewhere inside of you, you know
you
that
don't
they're,
belong here.
yeah, and you know it. And
Yeah.
I think that's another piece of it that I'm really interested in are how we cover that up when we really know it. Like we know if we know we're creative, if we know we're an artist, but we're covering it up, and that's where the shadow is.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly where the shadow is. And I think it looks different for a lot of people, but what happens is we learn as children that this way of being is not correct, that it
Mhm.
isn't good, that it isn't, either it didn't help us survive, or it made someone else feel bad, or it caused some drama and some conflict. Whatever it is, someone somewhere told us it wasn't okay to be this way. It
Mhm.
wasn't okay to be who you are. So we're children, right? We adapt. This is where we get creative. We cover it up. So we dig a 6-foot hole and we th- throw our genius and our creativity and our brilliance into that hole, and then we cover it up with trauma responses. We cover it up with copying somebody else. We cover it up with showing up just to fit in. Like, sure, I'll dress like you if that means other people will love me. Sure, I'll talk like you. Sure, I'll go to college and be a doctor. Sure, I'll do all these things if it means that I'm accepted. And all of these things we do to prove to ourselves that this part of us does not have a right to exist.
Mm.
And then we get sick, right? And then the body's like, I can't handle this anymore, because we have these competing beliefs of, but I need to be this way to belong, but actually this is my way of being, but actually this is correct. And if I can allow myself to dig that hole and dig that thing back up and get honest about what that story really is, what was it really about, and we learn to integrate that shadow, right? To integrate that energy back into our lives, including the anger, the bitterness, the frustration, the sadness, all of it that's attached to it. We start to integrate it back into our lives. And I have no other way of saying this, but just like the magic just starts to happen. Like, it's like you break down the foundation and you put the house back together in the correct order. And
Mm.
that's sometimes a painful process. And that's what we do. We use human design, we use shadow work, we use psychology, we use neuroscience, we use all of the different things. And it can be a painful process, but when you're putting things back together, you get to do it in your way, in your creative process, in a way that works for you. So you no longer have to be someone else to survive. You get to thrive as yourself. And it
Mm.
really does just create so much beauty.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. That was amazing. That like, wow.
That's it. We're
That's
done.
everything. That's everything.
That's all we got.
Though I will ask you,
Yeah.
what would be okay if you're going to give advice to somebody who really wants, like, really has this feeling. They've got this feeling that they have what it takes to have what it takes, whatever. They want to. They want to make something. They want to create something that doesn't match what their lives look like right now. Like they want to paint, but they're not a painter. Or they want to start a business, but it's scary and they don't know how. What would you
Yeah.
tell this person?
I would say that entering into this thing that you want to do is never usually for the reason that you think it is, right? That I can accept an invitation to this podcast, and we always have intentions, right? We talked a little bit about that, but like we always have preconceived ideas and expectations about why I'm doing this, how it's going to go, what am I going to get out of it, right? What's the benefit? So I can accept this invitation to do this podcast with you because my tone as, someone with the 1-8 channel is very important to me. The way that I communicate is very important to me. So I can look at this as practice, right? I can look at this as so many different things, of so many different representations of my creative process. But I don't ever know. I don't know until, I know. Maybe in 3 months, something happens with this podcast. I'm like, oh, that's why I did it. My point is, it doesn't really matter, like your reason for wanting to do something, because the fact that you want to do it is enough, right? So what if you just, and in human design we have strategy and authority, so I always say follow your strategy and authority. Like for me it's the sacral, like my sacral tells me to do something and I move, and I don't need to know. And the more that I try to figure it out and the more that I try to make sense of it, the more that I miss it, right? I miss this thing that's happening, that my body knows, that the universe knows, that the quantum whatever knows, God knows, whatever you believe in. So I would say move. I think movement is something that we receive from creativity. Definitely. That's like, what comes first, movement or creativity? Creativity or movement? I don't know. I would say move and see what happens. And that's kind of like been our motto for HDS, Human Design Shadow. Like the business in general and what we teach is fuck around and find out. Am I allowed to curse on here?
Yeah, it's fine.
My 8th time cursing. Okay. Fuck around and find out. That's what I would say. That yearning is not going to go away. So
Yeah.
see what's there.
Yeah. And you're bringing up HDS. I want my audience to know how they can work with you, how they can learn from you. Where can they find you?
Yeah, so I'm at humandesignshadow.com, and then my Instagram is Donna, Danna. And basically everything you want is in there. If I have a shadow report, I look at the body graph, the human design body graph, as the shadow chart. It's the same body graph you would get from any other website, but my perspective on it is a little bit different. It's that creative perspective. So I really look at it as a shadow chart. It's not for it's for someone who's ready, right? You have to be ready and you have to want to look at yourself in a different light. So I have the free chart and then the paid report. And then we have all kinds of different groups and classes that are always happening. So everything is usually on my Instagram or the website, but you can also
Yeah.
reach if you have questions.
Yeah. I love that. Like even on your Instagram, I feel like I can learn. You're just such a good
Yes.
teacher. Yeah.
I try to make Instagram like a library. Like I would love for it to be like a library where, oh, I'm learning about human design and shadow. Let me scroll through this and pick out the right book, pick out the right insight for me in this
Yeah.
moment.
Yeah. Awesome. Donna, thank you so
Yeah,
much for
thank
your
you.
wisdom and for being here with me and for this conversation.
So fun. Thank you so much.
So fun.